Muy buenos días a todas y todos.
Good morning, all. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this cycle of conversations, the climate management of ecosystems in Latin America and the Caribbean. As you know, since the end of 2021 and for 2022, the world has been facing a scarcity of fertilizer because of a height in the energy prices, which has increased in more than 100% the prices, and the fertilizers are not available in the market in many of our countries in Latin America because many production plants that had negative margins stopped their production because of the increases in energy prices. Unfortunately, this drop in the availability and the applications of fertilizers will also reduce the yield and the quality of food production. Also, the phenomenon related to climate change and the degradation of our soils is worsening this situation for Latin America and the Caribbean. And given this situation, the community of practices of soil in Latin America and the Caribbean will tackle this challenge through the generation of knowledge and bringing experiences and research from the different experts in 3 conversation meetings. The first one is devoted to the diagnosis on the present situation of the soil fertility in the region. A second workshop on the alternatives that are available for a sustainable management of soil fertility. And finally, a third meeting that is related to the policies that are being implemented in the region to promote and escalate these alternatives. On July the 9th, this practice community opened the debate through a regional event on biofertilizers and other technologies that are available to confront the fertilizer crisis in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the purpose was, on the one hand, to strengthen the cooperation agenda between the countries in the region through the exchange of experiences, good practices, policy tools, and public policies, and the dissemination of information to facilitate decision management for soil management. And on the other hand, the purpose was to confront the challenges of climate change and the fertilizer crisis. Today, we will continue with this debate, and we will deepen and open the dialogue on the present situation on the soil fertility and vegetable nutrition. I'm Axis Smith. I'm the assistant and consultant for the soil management for Central America and the southern of Mexico from the SCS, and I will be moderating this conversation today. Before presenting the panelists for this conversation, I want to greet you all who are here today. Welcome. Particularly, I would like to greet the representatives and teams of the FAO offices in the region, from academia, from research institutions, from producer associations, and also the regional and global networks. And also a special greeting to the members of the soil practices community and our sister community, the family agricultural group. We are very happy and thankful that we could meet with a group of experts of all of Latin America for this conversation. First, we have Dr. Fernando García, who is the professor of the School of Sciences, Agricultural Sciences in Argentina on the Universidad Nacional de Mar del Plata. Fernando is an agricultural engineer from the School of the University of Buenos Aires, has a master's and doctorate degree in agronomy from Kansas State University, has been a research of Argentina's INTA, and also the general director on the Institute of Plant Nutrition. At present, he is a private consultant in the area of fertility and soil management and crop nutrition, and also a professor in the agricultural sciences of the Universidad de Mar del Plata. His interest is the efficient use of nutrients following the for our component. We know this from the INTI, and it is interested in also in the ecology. Fernando, welcome to this panel. We also have on the Central American region, Dr. Alfredo Alvarado, who is Emeritus Professor of the Universidad de Costa Rica. Alfredo is an agricultural engineer from the Costa Rica University, has a master's and degrees from North Carolina State University. His area of interest is the investigation of natural resources, emphasizing in tropical soils. Has contributed to the development of knowledge in soil sciences to search for food security in Latin America. A specialist in soil classification, Alfredo is an author of more than 200 scientific publications and member of many associations. Welcome, Alfredo, from Costa Rica. For the Caribbean, we have Dr. Gaius Eudoxie. Gaius is a professor of soil sciences of the West Indies University in the St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago, and is responsible for teaching and researching the sustainable management of soil and nutrition of crops. He's also a vice dean of the internationalization of the school. More than 20 years of experience as a researcher in soil management, and he's a student of Professor Nasser Ahmad, who, as you know, contributed with the knowledge of soils in the Caribbean. Gaius is from the Alliance for Soils in Latin America and the Caribbean, ASLAC, and vice president of the work group, intergovernmental group on the drought, and has a long trajectory with national and international agencies.
Gaius, nice to have you on the panel. Tenemos también el placer.
We also have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Luiz. He is the main researcher from the National Council of Scientific Research and professor of the National University of Quilmes in Argentina. He is also director of the Biochemistry and Soil Microbiology Center. He has a doctorate in Biochemical Sciences of Universidad de La Plata and is the main researcher for CONICET. More than 83 publications, among them books, and he studies the microbiology and biochemistry of the soils and the interactions between plants and microorganisms. Since 2009, has been working with agricultural producers in the development of biological indicators and soil health. And that's why we invited Luiz to this conversation, because I think it's very important to talk about the biological part of the soil, because the soil fertility not only has to do with minerals, but also with the soil system and what happens in the soil. And we want to talk about these aspects when we talk today in this meeting regarding fertility. And finally, we have the pleasure of welcoming Marcos Angelini, who is a consultant in data and soil information for the World Alliance on Soils from Rome. He is an agricultural engineer from the National University of Luján in Argentina and has a doctorate from the Wageningen University. He has mapped the soil and is working in geostatistics. He has a long trajectory in the National University in INTA, Argentina, and INDRA in Montpellier, France, in the applications of remote sensors for environmental studies in the area of soil cartography and the mapping of soil quality indicators. At the end of 2021, he started working as an international consultant for the World Alliance for Soils, where he participates in projects related to national capacities for soil mapping and also for the development of soil information systems. Marco has published many works and in academic researches, and today will present his work and plans for the Latin American region regarding the initiative Global Map of Nutrients. Welcome, Marcos. I think it's going to be very interesting to listen to you because we want to have more information about the status of nutrients in our soils in the region. As you can see then, we have achieved to join panels of experts from the region of Latin America to discuss the status of fertility of our soils. Before reviewing our agenda, I will give some details about the transmission. Can you put this in presentation mode 1? Thank you. We want to remind you that we are transmitting this event with simultaneous interpretation into English. You can access through the YouTube channel of the FAO from the website that you see there, and also from our Twitter account. If you have questions, and the idea of this conversation is to talk, so we hope that you can send us your questions through the YouTube chat, indicating your name and also who are you asking the question to. And we invite you also to comment about this event in the social networks with this hashtag Comunidad de Práctica, hashtag Suelos, hashtag Fertilizantes. So, changing quickly to our agenda, so we will know what we will do in the next 90 minutes. The dynamic will be the following. First, we will have from each of the panelists a short intervention, talking a little bit about the regions in Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean. And then Luiz will talk about the biological fertility of soils, so as to expand our concepts on soil fertility and their importance. And then we're going to have a first round of questions between myself and the panelists. And Marcos will also talk about his plans on global maps of nutrients and nutrient balance. And then we will have time for discussions based on the questions that you will ask through the chat in YouTube. And thank you, Juan, for this agenda. And I don't want to speak only by myself here, and to start with the discussions and presentations, I invite Fernando García, who will open the dialogue on the soil fertility and regarding the situation of the soils in Latin America. Fernando, you have the floor. Good morning to all, and thank you, Axel. Thank you, the Soil Practices community of the FAO and the FAO team, for inviting me to present this present situation on the soil fertility and vegetable nutrition in South America. As you all know, the soils in South America are very variable, but I want to mention this concept of systemic fertility that already mentioned by Axel, and which includes not only minerals, but also the chemical, physical, and biological fertility of the soils. And thinking about the soil as an integral body, which is support for life, what we're concerned about is the issues that degrade the soil. And in Latin America, we can see some of the main problems which we are confronting. First of all, we see hydric and eolic erosion, wind and water erosion, also the exhaustion of organic matter, the loss of nutrients and biodiversity, soil compacting, and in many regions in Latin America, the salinization problem. All of these degradation problems are associated to the expansion to fragile ecosystems in different ecosystems of the subcontinent, but also our management of the soils that are being used for agricultural purposes. In the last years, there have been specific problems of pollution which need to be highlighted and with which we will have to manage and from now on. If we see the soil maps of South America, we will see that there is extreme variability, which I mentioned recently. And here what you see is the different or the main ecosystems, agricultural and natural, that exist in our subcontinent. And maybe what we can do here is differentiate in very general terms three large areas. The first is the one that corresponds to the tropical soils that includes Amazonas, Cerrados, the southern central part of Brazil, and the soils that are acid with poor nutrition, they need nutrients. And the second zone, which is the backbone of South America, is the area that is in the Andes region. And there are different ecosystems from the high plains, Altiplano, to the fertile valleys in many areas of the Andean region. And there we have many contrasts of acid soils and calcareous soils in many cases, soils that have acidity problems and soils that have an excess of calcium. And the third zone would be the one that corresponds to the Gran Chaco in Americano and also the Pampas region in the south, which have high original fertility, but throughout the years and its management has lost organic matter. And in many cases, they have a negative nutrient balances. If we focus on the nutrition area or minerals, to show you a general perspective, I think it is interesting to see this figure, which shows for the different countries in South America and a comparison with other countries in the world, what is the application removal ratio. In the green, we have nitrogen and red phosphorus. And when we have this red, yellow line is one, that is, we remove as many nutrients as we return to the soil. And we will see countries like Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay that are in a situation of negative balances. We remove much more nutrients than we are applying. And this will lead eventually to a loss of fertility.
And out of the other two countries of South America that are here, we are going to see the situation of Brazil and Uruguay with positive balances that could take us to an excess of nutrients, but that could depend on the condition of each one of the soils. So the most significant thing, we are seeing nitrogen and phosphorus, but what is the most significant thing that we see in this is carbon balances that are extremely negative. So we are looking at organic material, and we're losing carbon with all of that, what that means, right? A good example of that is what has happened with the Pampa region in Argentina. In these two maps, we see the almost pristine situation, the virgin situation to the left, and the agricultural badges from in 2018. You can see that this map is getting yellow, orange, and red. That's because the organic matter is dropping dramatically. This is one of the many examples that we can see in Latin America. So just to finish with this overview of headlines, As an example, I would like to show you how we use corn as an indicator and how we are managing or how we are seeing the relationship between the yields that are represented here in the remotion of nitrogen in the vertical axis and also the dosage of nitrogen that is applied through fertilization in the different countries. And for these, I'm using this proposals that are from the experts of the European Union that shows in the different lines in red, yellow, and green the different efficiencies of nitrogen, so 30 to a 60% and almost 90 and also 90%. So the proposal in this panel of experts is to show an ideal zone between the 60 and the 90% of use, and also risk zones for pollution, high application, low remotion, or risk of degradation, low application and high remotion in this case. So the point here shows what happens or the average globally, and what is going to show here, what we're going to see here are the different symbols, the different situations of the countries. So as we can see, there's a huge variability in terms of nitrogen usage in the different countries of the region. And even here, we could include Mexico and Central America. And there are going to be countries where we are going to start managing the different production centers with risk of degradation because the dosage of degradation are low and the remotion is high. So the situation of Chile and Uruguay in the risk contamination could be with high doses and elements that are not related to this use of a 60 to 90%, which is the proposal of the experts from the European Union. So with this overview, I wanted to thank you, and I am going to be here with you to exchange ideas with the excellent group of colleagues that I have the privilege of working with. So thank you. Thank you very much, Fernando. You did great in very little time, a very good summary of the conditions that we have and the different regions that we have. And also, what we were emphasizing here is this difference between the management and the status that we have seen based on this management. And that is what I want to talk about in the different countries. What are these differences about? So I also wanted to ask Alfredo Alvarado, who is going to tell us about Central America. So go ahead, Alberto, please. Thank you. Hello, good morning. I don't know if you can connect my talk now. My presentation. Well, my presentation is very brief because of time. We will include 5 slides only to show you an idea of what we do in the region. So it's similar to what was said before, the social aspect. As in South America, the biological fertility effects and other things too affect. In here, we also see an affection of the immigration of our people, our farmers to other areas, looking for better alternatives. And this is due to the lack of fertility and also the low yield. So, of course, there are other components, social components, that would be affecting the situation. But I'm not going to go into this little mess. The main soils of the region have been dream of people in different regions. So how to have a map that more or less represents the soils that are the most common in Latin America. In the 70s, we got the first soil world map of the FAO. And we started seeing a first option where we had 17 types of soils. In the last version of this, we saw 32 units. So that can give us an idea of the huge gain of knowledge, even though this is not related to the quality of the contents of each one of the geographic units that are presented. So remember that Central America is a region that has a lot of contrast, geological contrast. And also we have the Pacific coast, the Caribbean plate also, that creates a volcano chain just in that area. So these areas tend to dominate this area of the Pacific region. In the northern area, we see a slightly different situation because this is a prolongation of the northern side. So we see that in Costa Rica and in Panama, this is an extension of the southern continent. So by age and actions of other types of climate, the soil from Costa Rica up and also the vegetation and many other characteristics are very different to what we see in Costa Rica and to the south until we get to Colombia. So the next slide, please. The only way that I found to tell you something that could more or less help us manage the fertility of the region is that we talked about a Cronton concept that it was developed by Cronton a long time ago. And they said that each region wants to have a clay that is dominant. And this is what is defined. So almost a 90% of all of the chemical and biological reactions are going to be included here. So looking for the temperature in the region, we see that there are some places. So for example, we have the oxidic, catalytic, gibberistic, this acidity, and there's a lot of nitrogen and particularly phosphorus in very specific situations, in very specific areas. We see other ones. For example, we see red regions that have the formulas that use boron and other ones use zinc. So these are some of the mechanisms, the mineral mechanisms that we have. Now, when we talk about dominant clay, we're talking about a clay that is the most important one in the horizon A, not B, because some people dare to go to the southern horizon, and the quantity of data that they have is very little. So the clays respond very well to phosphorus and zinc. Rarely with nitrogen, we can elevate the yields. And in some cases, we have acidification of potassium. So for these regions, we could have fertilizers or this type of elements. The allophanic halocidic soils do have these different characteristics in the Andean region, as Alvaro was saying. This has a lot of use in South America. Now, the thing is that these clays in the higher parts, they're not formed. We do not have low range clays that are the ones that are going to fix the cost. The people in Holland have it very well in Central America. So we also have the vitric soils, and we would not have this kind of problems. So we're talking about problems of nutrition in the medium parts of the soils, where we see yellowish and reddish soils, but always looking at a horizon of more than 30 centimeters that would affect this kind of crops, many kinds of crops. So very rarely we also see acid rain and volcanic eruptions that are also going to put acid rain on the Caribbean to the Pacific. So the soils tend to dominate from the Pacific. We can rarely talk about this type of soils in the Caribbean. The few organic soils that we have in the region are also located behind the coast. We keep on also seeing the direction of the rivers. In general, there are acid soils that respond very well to these chemicals. The biggest mess that we have right now is that in most soils in the region, we have a mixed minerality. So in other words, there are no soils that are predominant. So we'll be talking about all of the soils that we have in the Caribbean and all of the soils, the types of soils that we have in the Pacific, and other ones that we have in valleys where we also see some vegetables that grow. So this presentation is just very general, as I was telling you. It's just to give you some context. It is more important from the point of view of the commercialization of fertilizers. So we need to divide the ecosystems of production in the region, and I separate them amongst traditional small farmers, and on the other side, farm regions and agroforestry. The first one is going to consume almost nothing. The agricultures are very poor, and when there is an international organization that gives them something, they plant something on the soil, mainly grape. And this is not something about yields. It's not huge yields. We're not talking about that. In spite of the 50 years that we have of research in applying fertilizers in the field, the yields are not going to go over half a ton or 1.5 tons. So without fertilizers, it would be very difficult to sustain the feeding system of all of these people in these regions. So in the forestry area, it is even more interesting because we do have companies that work in this system and that have areas that are important. For example, you can find plantations of 10,000 hectares in the southern part of Mexico too. So the difficult thing is to convince people that with 50 grams of triple for phosphate, you can hardly get to a response 20 years after. So in that area, we would have to work a lot. And the management of fertilizers is very important. Now, in the modern system, in the plantation area, we are going to consume more fertilizers, and that is why they demonize the whole region. And Costa Rica would be probably the worst devil of the zone. They use a lot of it. So they put 450 kilos of formulas high in phosphorus twice a year, 700 kilos of KSL, at least divided in 4 per year. So if with that we're not contaminating, then we would be lying, right? So all of this is for a very protected market and with a lot of help from the government. So the traditional area is on the one side the most abundant part, and the other sector use very fertile areas. Let's go to the next one, please. So as I don't have much time, I want to mention that I personally have dedicated almost 50 years of my life looking for literature and all of the information that is pertaining to the region. And now we are going to get a document that is called Soils of Central America. So this in here you're going to find what can be communicated. So you need to see what is good and what is not. Our colleague, Mr. Bendaña in Nicaragua, also launched a version of the Nicaraguan soils. So if you want to get to know in more depth about these topics, then you can get the first one in Costa Rica in a discounted price now. And Guillermo Bendaña's book is for free. You can download it for on Google. I really like Bendaña's document because it doesn't talk about this topic as I talk about it. It's more for farmers, not so technical. So he mentions what they have done and what has given them better and worse results. Thank you very much, Alfredo. We are a little bit tight with time, but I see that you are very passionate about this topic. So we really hope to be able to read your book, because in Central America, I think that this is a gap that we need to close. And I think that your book is going to be very good for that. So thank you very much. Thank you. I think that what you showed us is aligned with what we have been seeing with Fernando. So we can see here the diversity of the soils and the origins of the original fertility, and also the impact of management, and also the nutrition. So thank you very much, Alfredo. And now we're going to go to Gaius. Gaius.
I hope you're fine. Please go ahead with your presentation about the conditions and the status of soil fertility and plant nutrition in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A pleasant good morning to everyone. Thank you for the community of practice on soils in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm happy to be here with all of you to do a brief baseline report on soil fertility and plant nutrition in the Caribbean. And I want to certainly indicate that similar to Professor Alvarado, one of our emeritus professors as well, Professor Nazir Ahmad, I think our chair mentioned him, also produced a book of Soils of the Caribbean. And it is that book that I'm going to be using to help share some insights into those soils of the Caribbean. So I just wanted, before I jumped into the breakdown of the soils, just to give a brief understanding of some of the key forming factors of the soils and the variabilities in the region. So firstly, the region, the archipelago, is made up of about 3 key geologic acts. One, the Leeward Islands to the north, close to the Florida, the Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, the DR, and Puerto Rico. And some of the smaller islands, they form the Leeward Islands of the Caribbean, and they are formed mainly on a calcareous geology. And then we have a little lower down our Windward Islands that come around in the arc towards South America again. And they are generally, with the exclusion of Barbados, that is part of that calcareous geology, they are generally volcanic in their origin. And lastly, towards the lower end, where we do have Trinidad and Tobago, as well Guyana and Suriname, as well as French Guyana, we know that they are forming part of that South American belt, and the geology tends to be a little different. Some obviously metamorphic rocks from the Andes, and some other inland geological features and physiographic features that influence them. Importantly as well, for that particular region, is the vast amount of rain that and precipitation that we experience, particularly obviously during our wet season, which is going on now, that has a significant impact, in addition to obviously our consistent high temperatures, average temperatures roughly about 32, 33 degrees Celsius, creates a tremendous impact on the soils that form under our particular regions. So Professor Nazir Ahmad, and you're seeing a couple of photos of him in some of the examples there, following some surveys that were done in the 60s and 70s, classifying our soils in the region, grouped our soils in the Caribbean into 6 key groupings, of which you will see they have 2 subtypes in the calcareous features, but the 6 key groupings of soils that are present in the region. We have those that are formed from fresh marine and freshwater sediments, and these are our low-lying soils along our coastal zones, dominating mainly some of the mainland territories like Guyana, Suriname, Belize, and as well countries like Trinidad. And these are generally dominated by high activity clays, our swelling vermiculitic and montmorillonitic type clays. And obviously they are generally high in fertility, but also present tremendous problems in terms of their activity. Then we have material that was deposited a little older, pre-quaternary material. And these really make some of the best soils that we have. They are alluvial soils as well, because they come from both marine and freshwater sediments. They do provide us with the greatest opportunity. They are found on very flat surfaces, easy for mechanization, and generally range from clay, loam to loam soils. Then we have older freshwater sediments. These are stratified soils, very challenging to manage, very low fertility. These are generally present an agylic horizon, very compacted clay zone upon very sandy top material. So these soils are probably some of our most challenging that we have. And then we have our calcareous soils, and they have two different types, those that form from the coralline limestones, for instance, the Bahamas, Caymans, Barbados, etc. And then we have some that form on very soft calcareous materials such as marl that you found interspersed throughout our islands. They generally tend to have a little bit of good fertility, but once they are eroded, as you're seeing in some of the examples there, they tend to create tremendous problems of micronutrient inefficiencies. So generally we have micronutrient deficiencies as the pH of the eroded phases tend to be extremely high, sometimes above 8.5. Then we have our volcanic material, our Andy soils that are predominant across our Windward Island, what we call the OECS chain. Mountainous, I guess in the world reference base, ferrous soils, according to USDA, a lot of them are Andy soils. We call them red and yellow earths. Very deep on very steep slopes, very deep, but they also provide extremely good fragility in terms of their use. And you've seen a very good example of contour cultivation there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And lastly, we have our residual soils that make a vast amount of our areas, for instance, our mountainous ranges in Jamaica, in Trinidad, and the interior of Guyana. And these are on very steep slopes, very shallow, very fragile soils. Most of them tend to be ulti soils, so they do have some amount of weathering and profile development. And they do tend to be as well sometimes limited in their fertility. So just to touch on a few of the key fertility issues that we face, obviously the region is afflicted by high temperature, a high rainfall, and very quick organic matter degradation. So all of our soils, except for those in the very low-lying areas, in submerged areas, tend to have very low levels of organic matter. And that obviously is a critical fertility issue for us. One of, by far, the greatest soil health issue that we face. Low macronutrients, particularly potassium and phosphorus. Potassium obviously due to extreme weathering, and phosphorus sometimes due to the nature of the geology, but also due to sometimes fixation and low and very high pHs. Wide pH range from the calcareous to the very acid soils that we have, our alluvial soils. Very shallow profile, particularly for our calcareous soils that are formed on calcium carbonate limestone. So that's a tremendous fertility issue because the profile is very shallow and hence the available room for growth is very low. Combining with the poor fertility of most of our soils, we have very poor physical condition. And that, I think, came out very strongly from Fernando in terms of the problems that we face in this particular part of the world. And because we have very poor physical condition, you know, in terms of degradation, erosion remains our #1 problem on these soils. So while they may have a lot of these soils have adequate amounts of calcium and magnesium, you know, and some of the micronutrients, the macronutrients are where we tremendously have problems. And again, the management of those macronutrients is very poor in the region, leading to not only poor overall growth and development and productivity, but also environmental concerns. So we do know that we have some concerns. Two last things I'm going to touch on. One, the fact that within the region, we are still struggling to provide appropriate soil data and information to help us manage the fertility properly. And yes, there is a lack of capacity and knowledge as well. So there are plenty areas for us to build on. So I thank you for your attention and look forward to engaging with you further.
Thank you very much. This was brilliant, Gaius. A very good summary of the conditions and the needs of the region, of this sub-region of Latin America, which is certainly a region which is very diverse and very complicated, apart from 4 different languages which are spoken there. So again, thank you very much. And I think you touched already a number of points we want to extend later in the discussion. Thanks a lot. Ahora pues regresamos a español.
Now we go back to Spanish, and we have Luiz Vol, because I think that if we are talking about the fertility of the soil, we need to see the biology. I think that in the past, we have seen a more mineralistic concept, so to speak. It is a mineralistic concept that only looks at the nutrients in terms of minerals in the soil, and not so much the holistic concept of the soil as a soil that is alive, where there is a biological community that is contributing considerably to the fertility of the soil and also the operation and functioning of the soil. So we have invited Luiz to talk about the foundations of the biological fertility of the soils. So we will listen now from Luiz. You have the floor.
Luiz, ¿nos escucha?
We can't hear you, Luiz. Okay, here. Yes, thank you, Luiz. Go ahead. Good morning, all. I am going to talk about the fertility of soil from the biological point of view, and understand the biofertility of the soil, which is expressed in the development of the plants that grow on the soils. But to understand the concept of biofertility, we need to understand that the genome of the plant, the genetic of the plant, is expressed in the interaction with many microorganisms that are associated amongst themselves, and we consider that they're a part of the plant. This number of microorganisms associated to plants is huge. In the genome of a plant, we have interactions with 10 billion genomes of bacteria, 1 billion genomes of virus, protists, 1 million genomes of fungi, and also algae. So this is a microbiota that is associated to the plants, and this microbiota determines what we call the rhizospheric microbiome, which is the one associated to the roots of the plant, and not only to the roots of the plant, but today we know a microbiota associated to the aerial part of the plant, and we know about a microbiome that is associated to the internal part of the plant. For example, many of these microorganisms synthesize phytohormones that don't have an action on microorganisms, but rather on the plant itself. So these microorganisms are part of this system that we call the plant. And this microbiology associated to the plants that we consider as a symbiotic system in each of the plants, it is more complex when we know that the roots of the plants are associated to mycorrhizic fungi that extend the volume of exploration of the soil through the roots. And not only do that, but in turn, they connect the plants amongst themselves. The wiring between the plants allows the transfer of nutrients. It has been proven that plants that are connected with mycorrhizomes transfer carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen, and not only nutrients, but also signals, because they function like WhatsApp groups. And when a plant is attacked by a pathogen, the defense mechanisms generated in one plant is transmitted to the other plants that are connected through this wiring. So this complexity of the biological system, which is the plant with the microbiome, determines that the biofertility of the soil, this nutrition from the nitrogen and phosphorus that are present in the organic matter and not only in the mineral part of the soil, this reaches the plant through this microbiome of the soil and also the rhizosphere that is associated to the plant. So what we need to start thinking about in terms of soil fertility is an integrated fertility to the biological part of the soil. So this biological fertility of the soil, in some ways, the biology shows us that it is interfered by the exogenous chemical fertilization, and we need to study this. The fertility of the soil is given by this complex chemical structure and physical structure that, in fact, from the present point of view of the knowledge we have of the functioning of the biology of the soil, this chemistry and physics of the soil, which is available to the plant, is the result of the biological activity of the soil on its texture, the mineralogy, and also the organic components. And also the soil is full of a very complex biology, which is very diverse. And it's this biological diversity that determines the carbon capture capacity of the soil. And this structure of the microbiome is modified by the environmental conditions and resources. This microbiota of the soil is responsible to transform the matter and also responsible for generating soil structures through the soil aggregates. And it's responsible for generating interaction networks. Today, we can say that this healthy microbiota of the soil, which makes it work correctly, will determine a healthy microbiota for the rhizosphere, and this will determine a healthy microbiota for the plant and the health of the plant, which generates the foodstuffs and also the nutrition to this plant is what is transferred to the animals and then to humans. So the action of humanity with its actions to generate food can condition this health of the soil. And then we need to start thinking about this system in a more complex manner and to include biology in our concepts of soil fertility. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Luis.
Thank you, Luis. I think that this was a good summary on the need to study the soil as a holistic entity and not only looking at nutrients or minerals in the soil. Without this world of the biology of the soil, without this, we will not be successful for the management of nutrients. So this is seen in many parts in the field where we have degraded soils, and many producers in Central America which say that the soil is tired. But for me, this is the expression that explains that the soil doesn't have a biological life. So you can use as many fertilizers as you want, but it won't have an effect because of what you explained right now. This is what is missing. So we need to see, if we are talking about the management of fertility, we need to take into account how we can manage and favor the biology of the soil. So then this is transferred to the benefits on the plants and to the animals. Thank you, Luis. I think that in the second conversation of this cycle, we need to go deeper into the management of the biology of the soil, as we call it, the health of the soil, not only fertility as such. So thank you, Luis. So with this, we have a complete round of talks between the three regions of Latin America and also the biological aspects. And I would like to take some time to ask to Fernando, for example, about what I mentioned before. your last slide on the differences between the countries and also the degradation and the pollution. So how do you explain the differences between the countries in terms of negative nutrient balance and positive nutrient balance? What I've seen in the southern cone is that there is a great difference between Argentina and Uruguay. What is the reason for this, and how can you explain this? Well, thank you for this question. And as I said in the beginning, right now we see fertility not from the point of view of minerals only, but as Luiz explained, from the biology, physics, and chemistry. And this is associated to what you're asking. The issue of the difference responds first to the conditions that I mentioned as original fertility, the pristine conditions of those soils. So if you compare the red tropical soils, which have less availability of nutrients originally, compared to the Chaco-Pampean region, we will have the first region why there is this difference in the nutrient balance. And the second is associated to the social, economic conditions, political conditions, development conditions of the agricultural sector, which is what Alfredo was mentioning in his comments regarding Central America. Many of these differences also exist here. And specifically what you were mentioning regarding Uruguay and Argentina, there is a culture to use nutrients that is historical in Uruguay, also due to the original conditions of those soils, because Uruguay is a country that has it is very challenging to work in Uruguay, whereas in Argentina there is good availability of nutrients. And also the agricultural rotations that is done for many years, fortunately have allowed to maintain these conditions for many years. So there are reasons that I could mention that are due to the original pristine conditions of the soil, and others that are related to the social, economic, cultural conditions of the countries or the regions. So this is a quick quick answer to your question. So this is in line to what Alfredo mentioned regarding the different social aspects. And there are parallel ideas in these areas.
Similar experience with the management of the soils, of these different types of soils you presented, in line what Fernando and Alfredo reported from Central America and South America?
Sorry, Axel, was that question to me? I was listening to the interpretation. I didn't hear clearly. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry for that. I was asking myself, you heard from Alfredo and Fernando that there are, of course, some differences in origin of soil and development, as you said, your calcareous soils, shallow and so forth. But also they pointed out that there is a great influence of the management of small inputs or no inputs towards then different types of farmers with different possibilities to invest in fertilization. Do you see a similar pattern in some areas of the Caribbean?
Yes, that pattern is reflective of the Caribbean, and we have seen from my experience a pattern where, as we move from the plantation systems into more small farming systems, and the availability of nutrient inputs on the market increased, particularly through input suppliers who also serve as sort of extension officers and persons who provide information about fertility. We have seen a change in the behavior with regards to how farmers will manage their fertility. But irrespective, it does change across countries depending on what is available, the information that is available to the producers of those countries, depending on the crops that they are growing. But we do realize that for most of them, it is an ad hoc system. It is a system where there is not a sense of what does that soil have already available compared to the crop nutrient requirements, compared to the environmental circumstances under which you are growing. So there is no great understanding of that strong interaction that is needed to ensure that when we do bring in nutrient amendments, that we are doing so in a manner that is, judicious and that is sustainable. So it is very ad hoc at the moment. And, from what I have experienced, a significant amount of our farmers tend to certainly over-fertilize and certainly overuse nutrients to their own detriment, whether that be as well economical, but certainly to the larger landscape degradation in terms of environmental pollution. So there is certainly a need for us to better manage, the information that is available to our producers that will help guide them in making rational decisions.
Thank you very much, Gaius. I have another question for Alfredo. Alfredo, no estabas pues hablando de
Alfredo, you were talking about the different types of soils and also the mineralogy that determines the present situation. I did not understand very well if you were mentioning something about, well, I have two questions actually. One is about the heavy metals. If this is something that we see in Central America and it is a problem in the soils and their management. And the other thing is, as you talked about the phosphorus fixation. We also have acidity in many soils in Central America today, and this is a change in the availability and also aluminum toxicity. So how do you see the situation in Central America? The pH and also acid soils connected to heavy metals and aluminum.
So Alfredo, please go ahead. Alfredo, I think that you're muted, so you need to open your microphone, please. Thank you. Okay, in general, the knowledge in the region about what we could call microelements or minor elements are less than what the other things that we know in Latin America. So I couldn't tell you that heavy metals right now play a special role, a preponderant role.
Otro tipo de problemas. A veces se mencionan problemas, sobre todo en áreas de minería extensiva.
Sometimes we have erosion in extensive mining. For example, in the north of Costa Rica, close to Nicaragua, we have a lot of problems with mercury.
En algunas partes de montaña en Guatemala.
In some places in Montaña in Guatemala, there's a lot of problem with arsenic. And on the other hand, the volcanic soils, we see fluorosis, and there is where we have a lot of natural flows that are causing a lot of problems on streets and roads and those types of things. But in general, if you look at 10 communications about that topic, you would have information about it. If you see some information about that, please let me know, because I would like to read that. Now, for me, the acidity problem is a big problem, and it's something that we have been knowing about for 10 years. So acidity is something that is very well known. What is not well known is the residual effect that this has on, in terms of how much callstone we are going to use afterwards. So that is what we need to consider, considering also the texture of the soil. We need to see how much lime we're going to be using and the residual effect that lime has. So yes, there is a lot of benefit in terms of checking what are the biggest areas of the region so that we can improve the processing plants of lime. Now, the problem with this type of plants is the PRT. So we get very big particles of components, and they're not decomposed, and they do not neutralize acidity. So that is a situation that is easily corrected. We do not need that much investment to identify where we can avoid, for example, transport costs of the product because of big distances. So in Central America, we import from Guatemala, and many times we do not determine the humidity percentage. So if you're pulling water as if it were lime, it's useless. So that would be some of the appreciations about this problem. And another thing that I think that it has a lot of future, and maybe Dr. Wall can talk about this. It's what I call genetic improvement of tolerance to this type of problems. So unfortunately, even today, we have forest plantations that do not have a screening about what are the different things that we have not been seeing in more phosphorus or other types of minerals and chemicals. If we improved in those terms, it would be great. Now the problem is also, and I tell you because we had a program with the CIET for about 10 years about improvement and genetic improvement and biologic fixation of sodium. And the problem was not developing the theory or mechanisms to improve this. The problem was that when you train people and you change government, the people that are not from that mandate, from that government, they get fired. So then you go back again to saying how much quantity you're going to use for the soil and in what conditions. So you start all over again. Then the varieties can die, nobody reproduces them. So you start from scratch all over again. Sometimes not even the labs exist anymore. So it is not lack of knowledge, it is lack of logistics. Thank you, Alfredo. So as you were mentioning, Luis, I would like to ask 2 or 3 questions to Luis. Also from our project in Central America for soil and water for agriculture, we have been talking about what are the main indicators that we need to indicate to then understand how we can manage our situations with the producers. So there are indicators, physical indicators, and there are chemical indicators. But when we got to the biological part, what are the indicators that will give us an idea about the biology state, that this organism of soil that can be measured in an easy and efficient way? Because I think that many times we are trying to see how we can measure this. What are the indicators that we can use for soil biology? And it's actually not that easy. So let's start with organic matter. This is something that we can have one indicator about, but maybe it's not everything. So I would like for you to, Luis, to tell us about how we're going to work with these indicators. Well, the biological indicators is an area in full development. As soil biology is complex, the indicators are, we still do not have very simple indicators that can be used in a field. But what we have had in the last years is the possibility of measuring the enzymes of the soil. The enzymes of the soil are going to allow us to generate diagnosis and the health of the soil, just as when we start analyzing blood and we see that if our liver works well or not. So we can check the acid the fat levels of the soil and the quality of the organic matter, not just the value of the matter, but also the quality. And this is an indicator that we have seen and that is related even up to the worm level that we have in a soil, which is something that is not that easy to measure. So we need to correlate it with the carbon capture capacity of the soil, and also the analysis that is the most promising, integrating the other types of analysis, is analyzing the DNA of the soil. This seems to be very sophisticated, but the strategy of measuring the DNA of the soil currently allow you to know this microbiology and understand more this composition. So we start understanding how to interpret this. And what we know is that these indicators are going to allow us to monitor the different types of management of the soils. So different agricultural practices can be monitored, and you can decide if this agricultural practice is going to improve the quality of the soil or if it's going to damage it. Thank you very much, Luis. I think that this is a pattern that we see right now in different interventions of the panelists, that we still have gaps of information. We still have knowledge gaps that we need to close. I think that the gap in the soil health in the biological part is even bigger than the other ones. But as we do also have time constraints, I would like to take advantage of this gaps of information. I think that Gaius also showed us in his intervention that there is a lack of information about the soils. There is a lack of knowledge. There is a lack of people too. So I also think that, Alfredo, you can confirm that in Central America, the soil people are not that many. So uh, uh, I don't know if you can get a handful of people and that's it. So I would like to talk to Marcus right now, because Marcus is actually working on how to close these gaps of information with some tools, modern tools, and he can show us, or he can give us some ideas in terms of what status we're in. And as I have always said, if you don't have a way to measure things, then you have no idea how to manage them. So we are very anxious to get to hear you, Marcus, and to know about your plans too for Latin America in the global map of the status and balance of nutrients in the soil. Thank you very much, Axel. Thank you very much, the organizers, for inviting me to present here. Yeah, well, I am here to talk to you from a different perspective, from the soil balance side. We work on classifying the development of national maps and the global maps, and we work generally with the technicians of each one of the countries, which are the ones that contribute in the end with their work and with their information. They allow us to see these products in a joint way. So in this case, there are two new initiatives. I am going to talk about the balance and the global map of the state and the balance of nutrients in the soil. This is a new initiative that has just been launched. And what it wants is to generate a map of the current state, so a baseline of the nutrients and their balances. It is based on these national contributions. It is a volunteer project where we can work together from the alliance, and we can facilitate the techniques, the mapping techniques, the organization of information, the link between the different groups, also to be able to work on these maps in a concrete way. And at the same time, we are working on the map, the global map of erosion, which is, as Fernando said before, is a factor for losing nutrients, and not only nutrients, but soil itself, the living part of the soil. So we have, for this initiative, we have two phases. The first one is to develop this baseline of soils and also attributes from the soil that are related to exchanging management and also the carbonic aspect and the nutrients. And we also have the second phase, which is going to be estimating the balance of nutrients, for example, the three main nutrients, which are NPK. So we have an important role in the first phase that the laboratories have. And in this case, I would like to tell you that labs, the networks of labs, are essential in the gathering of information and also in the quality of data. So we have experiences in which when you do not have an observation, a control about the quality of the information that is produced by the labs, then it is very difficult to get to conclusions, concrete conclusions, because we are losing base information, or base information is it's very noisy, to call it a way. So we are shaping up this work groups regionally and nationally in a network of labs, a global network, and also in Latin America in particular. So these are very important for us. This is to collect information of the nutrients and also properties of soils that are related to fertility. And this is going to need a harmonization of information related to the depth of the samples that have been taken into the different soils, and also the methods that have been used in the lab. We know that these are not the same methods that are used everywhere. Starting from having this information already adjusted and organized, then we are going to be generating the models and the maps as they have been generated before. So a grid where each one of the cells is going to contain the value of the nutrients and the properties of the active soils. And the first results are going to be ready for the end of December this year. We hope that for December the 5th to be able to present the first results. Now, about the balance map, we are going to do that next year, and we are going to be needing information about the distribution, the maintenance areas, and also the types of fertilizers, the types of fertilizers, and that information is going to allow us the input, to allow us to see the inputs and the outputs of nutrients. So in this sense, we call all of the community of experts to check the different techniques that we want to implement, and also have better tools if they're available, of course. So we hope that with these products, we can contribute to a sustainable development, identifying as well, but particularly identifying zones for the implementation of practices for sustainable management, and also contributing to the joint nutrient management, and also carbon kidnap. So we have the soil project that is already running, and starting from this information, we can start linking and start doing synergies with other projects that have been worked on previously. For example, the map for potentials and of carbon and all of that. And also we are going to be able to work in the decision-making process, identifying the main factors for losing nutrients. And also we're going to be able to work on the different projects nationally. And also we are going to be able to work on different projects, different projections related to external factors as commercialization and prices of fertilizers, and also the effects of public policies and management policies. So that is what I was just wanted to tell you, what I wanted to tell you. So if you're interested in participating in this strategy, please let me know. You can contact me, and I am here for any question you may have. Thank you.
So I would like to ask you how to participate here, because this is a good idea to join together and bring these information to the table, so the information is available for all. What I did not understand well, I think that the FAO has some activities regarding the laboratory analysis to obtain the data. Can you describe where are we in terms of this? I understand that there is a network of laboratories to improve the analysis, which is called La Solan, and there are laboratories throughout Latin America that are referent to have a harmonization of the data. Because I think that there is a problem in the mapping because the data are not harmonized. How can we use the different sources of information and the different numbers so that they are related amongst themselves? Can you talk a little bit more about this issue? Yes. Regarding the first question on how to participate, well, the participation in these types of projects is voluntary. Each country, not all of them, but most of the countries have a focal point that corresponds to the Ministry of Agriculture of each of the countries. And there is also a network of institutions on soil information, and usually the soil institutes of each of the countries are working in these types of activities. In general, what we do is to contact the focal point or the representative of the network to incorporate the interested parties in these types of products, because these products need to be valuable at the national level. So regarding the network of laboratories, well, this is an idea that emerged, I don't know exactly the date, but it is relatively new. And it is a network of national laboratories and regional laboratories where they work mainly on the laboratory methods. What are the protocols to be followed? And I understand that samples are taken and there are rounds of analysis made between the laboratories to determine the quality of the data produced. So this is one of the main activities that they carry out, besides the training that they provide in each of the laboratories. And on the other hand, related to this is a network that is working with spectrometry, the use radiometers to establish the properties of the soil. This is an indirect research through spectral samples of the soils, and you can infer from that different properties of the soil with a degree of error. Of course, not all, because these techniques are very new and they need to be adjusted. We need the laboratory analysis and the spectral signatures that are a reference to generate a model that will allow us to predict. But these models, for example, if we change parent material, the model will not work for the same soil properties. So in the end, we need the laboratory samples. I just went into many details, but well, yes, Marcos, but this shows us again that there is still something to investigate there and to have more knowledge about that so that we can close the gaps and have the information necessary for the proper soil management. So good luck with your plans, and I hope that many of the participants are contributing to this effort. In the end, it's the effort of all and for all. And talking about the participants, I am very happy because we have almost 700 participants in this conversation. So I think that there is an interest on these issues. Unfortunately, we are close to the end of the conversation, but I think that we have a little extra time. However, I would like to have 2 small rounds. And so maybe you have like 30 seconds to answer, because there are many, many questions in the chat. Obviously, we won't be able to have a discussion on all of this. We will collect, and we're going to talk about the panelists so that they can maybe answer in written form each of the questions later on. So I would like to have 2 questions that we selected from this chat. One is for Luiz regarding the inoculations with native bacteria, the mountain microorganisms that have the capacity to promote growth of phytopathogens in different environments. There is a movement for this in different parts. So what is your perception, Luiz, in 30 seconds? We know that this is a topic that we can discuss, and maybe in the second conversation we can take back this topic. But I would like to know in 30 seconds, very quickly, what is your first perception on these mountain microorganisms that are then used in cultures? So then Fernando 30, Gaius 30, and Alfredo 30. Well, the use of these microorganisms, these native microorganisms, is very useful. I will just put it this way. It is like adding to the plant a technical director or a Maradona or a Messi, and the team will play better this way. This is a way of improving biofertility using a tool that organizes the rest of the team. Fernando? Regarding these, I think that Luiz is the best person to answer this, but I agree with him. This is another element, a biological element. But Axel, I think that it's important to talk about other things from the conversation. We all understand that the fertility doesn't have this mineralistic conception, and it is expanded not only to the biology, but also the physics and the chemistry. I think that we need to understand more the soil as a very complex system, particularly its interaction with the plant, with the flows of matter and energy that generate this complexity and this need for organization. And what Luiz was saying, this contributes to this organization. And there are examples in South America in the integration in Brazil, in forestry, in the green agriculture in Argentina. I think that this is where we need to put our focus on to study the fertility of the graded soils. I think that they're going through different processes throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, and to contribute to some of the questions. There is a work on biological indicators that have been proposed for tropical soils. This is a work of Embrapa from Dr. Ayelo Carvalho Mendez. So those who are interested in these indicators, and they are working in situations even of production. So I invite you to see this in their site. It is a work that has been done for a while, and they have compiled information. So I would like to have a few words from Alfredo regarding what we had talked about, the biology of the soil. And I think that we are going to take back that topic in the next conversation. But Alfredo, your quick opinion about this. Just a few words. You need to open your mic. We are not listening, Alfredo. Your mic is off. Thank you for this opportunity. I really don't have much to say to add to this topic, except for the fact that I think that we should work more with field information. When I started, it was horrible to say that everything that was published were laboratory articles, that this grows more, the other one less, that this doesn't meet with that one. But in the field, we see the product, and where are we going to put it, what response we're going to get. So I think that there are aspects that I would like to know, and I would like to know how to cooperate. Maybe you put 30 tons of some type of organic compound, for example, for the potatoes. In many regions, they do this. And then later on, there's nothing. So why does it decompose so quickly? What can we do so that it has a medium life that is at least reaches the time of crop collection? Yes, thank you, Alfredo. And very quickly, Gaius.
Soil biology and what we talked about, the connection to soil fertility.
Thank you so very much, Axel. And I must say we do have some experience with regards to some of those microbes. We have seen some wonderful effects, particularly phosphorus solubilization. But I do have to agree with Luiz. I think what we see is that we have that set of biological, chemical, as well as physical indices that probably are our orchestra, but we need a conductor. We need other things that will ensure that they work together. And you know, I listened to Alfredo, and organic matter is one of those things that is required in our degraded soils to help stimulate that orchestra to work together to give us this synergy we have. But we still have much to understand, you know, so it is something that we need to continue to work on. And I think it's an excellent idea for further discussion.
Okay, thank you. Gracias. Desafortunadamente,
unfortunately, time flew by, and there is a lot to discuss. I think that it is clear that we are sharing between the three regions all our problems and knowledge gaps, which we need to close. There are different regions that we need to look at what is the proper management of fertility in those areas. But I think that we all agree that the biological part, we need to take this more into account, and we need to study more how we can measure, for example, the costs for this, what we can achieve with this together, and see this one or the other separately, but see the soil as a holistic organism. And I hope that next meeting we can take back this discussion, because we need to talk about the status. In the next conversation, we will talk about alternatives, how we can manage this situation and make proposals. The second conversation will be on August the 17th at the same time. And the third one, where we are going to focus more on the policies That would be September the 21st. Please take note of these dates. And these conversations are in line with what we have talked today, and we have seen that there is still a lot to discuss. Also, I would like to invite you to this symposium, the Global Symposium on Soil Nutrition, that will be held next week from the 26th to the 29th. You will see there the URL, the website where you can obtain more information about this. We are sharing this in the chat as well. And there are to the more than 700 participants that we have. And obviously, we are inviting all of you to participate in the community of soil practices for Latin America and the Caribbean. And also with the practices of family agriculture practices. These are two sister communities where there is this space where we can discuss on these issues that we talked about today. And to finish, we have obviously our Alliance for the Soils of Latin America and the Caribbean, where, as we have heard from Marcos, we are coordinating activities and efforts amongst all of us to move ahead in our soil sciences and obviously our skills to manage the soils. So I just want to thank all the participants. We will try and go back to these questions that we have in the chat, but I would like to thank all of you, Marcos, Fernando, Alfredo, Luiz, and Gaius. It was a great pleasure, both in the preparation for this conversation, as well as the conversation in these 90 minutes, almost 120 minutes. So I think that it was not enough to discuss all the topics that we have. Latin America is a very big continent. We have a great diversity. There are still gaps, but I think that through these meetings and conversations and these community of practices, we can exchange ideas and see where we are and what are the things that gather us and what are the differences and where we need to apply principles in the local context. We know that Alfredo will publish his book very soon, the book on soils of the Caribbean. I'm recommending this also because it is a Bible for the people who want to work in the Caribbean. So not to extend this even more, once again, thank you all. Thank you to the FAO who made this possible. And thank you all for the questions and to those who were involved. So I hope that you have a very good day. And I hope that you keep healthy these days. And see you soon. In August, we will meet again, and in September also. So good day, good afternoon, and thank you very much.